In the soft hush of early morning, before the city fully wakes and the familiar rhythm of live television begins to hum, Al Roker sits by the window with a notebook resting lightly in his hands, not filled with scripts or forecasts, but with quiet reflections that have become his most trusted tool over the decades. Because after years of speaking into cameras, of delivering the day's weather with a steady voice no matter what storms may come, he has learned that staying mentally sharp is less about keeping up with the pace of the world and more about knowing when to step outside of it, if only for a moment. Across the room, Deborah Roberts moves with a calm familiarity, the kind that comes from a shared life built on understanding the unseen pressures of broadcasting. And though their mornings are often busy, there is an unspoken respect for this quiet ritual of his, a recognition that it is not indulgence but necessity, something that allows him to return to the public eye, not just prepared, but present. Al didn't always have this rhythm, not in the early years when the excitement of live television was matched only by its relentless demands, when every day felt like a race against time, and clarity came second to immediacy. But as the years passed and the novelty gave way to endurance, he began to notice something subtle yet persistent, that the mind, much like the body, requires care, requires moments of stillness in order to remain resilient. And it was this realization that slowly shaped what would become his quiet strategy, one rooted not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent acts of attention. Sometimes it begins with writing, a simple act of putting thoughts onto paper without judgment or expectation, allowing the noise of the day to settle into something more manageable, something that can be understood rather than carried. In other times, it takes the form of a slow walk, either through familiar streets or just around the block, where the repetition of steps creates space for reflection, a chance to reconnect with the present moment in a way that no studio ever quite allows. Deborah has watched this evolution with a quiet admiration, recognizing how these simple practices have not only sustained him, but deepened him, how they have allowed him to remain curious and engaged, even after decades in a profession that can so easily lead to fatigue. And in their conversations, often brief, sometimes just a glance exchanged over coffee, there is an acknowledgement that longevity is not an accident, but a choice, one that must be made again and again in the face of routine. For an audience that has spent a lifetime navigating their own responsibilities, their own changes and challenges, Al's approach resonates in a deeply personal way because it reflects a truth they know well, that staying sharp is not about resisting time, but about adapting to it with intention, about finding ways to remain mentally and emotionally present even as the years bring new complexities. There are mornings, of course, when the weight of repetition threatens to dull even the most seasoned perspective, when the familiar cadence of the broadcast feels more like obligation than opportunity. But it is in those moments that Al leans most heavily on his quiet strategy, returning to the practices that ground him, that remind him why he began in the first place. And it is often Deborah who gently reinforces this, not with advice, but with presence, a steady reminder that he is more than the role he plays on screen. As the day unfolds and the cameras capture his easy smile and practiced delivery, few viewers would guess at the deliberate care that underpins it all, the deliberate pauses, the mental resets, the quiet discipline of someone who understands that clarity is not something that can be forced, but something that must be cultivated over time. And yet, perhaps that is precisely the point, because the goal is not to reveal the effort, but to embody its results, to offer a sense of ease that feels natural, even when it has been carefully maintained. In the evenings, when the pace finally slows and the day's demands have been met, Al and Deborah often find themselves returning to that same sense of quiet that began the morning, not as a retreat, but as a continuation, a chance to process what is past and to prepare gently for what lies ahead. And in these moments, there is a kind of quiet satisfaction, not in having done something extraordinary, but in having remained steady, present, and engaged throughout it all. Over time, this has become more than a strategy. It has become a philosophy, one that values consistency over intensity, awareness over urgency, and presence over perfection. And for Al, it is this approach that has allowed him to not only endure, but to thrive, to remain mentally sharp in a world that rarely slows down. And as he prepares each day to step once more into the bright lights of live television, he carries with him the quiet confidence of someone who knows that true clarity does not come from the spotlight, but from the stillness that exists just beyond it, waiting to be embraced.